Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is late evening here for me in Vancouver, and I'm feeling the oomph to create this video for you. My name is Vince Gelman. Thank you for joining me. Right now, I'm tired, but I'm going to get through this. I'm feeling it. I have some new creative wordplay for you. Some hidden meanings in words, secret meanings in words. And what I love about wordplay is that it's a fun and creative way to reveal wisdom, to reveal higher truths. So let's just jump right into it. So if we look at the word dissolution, we find the word solution. And if we look at the word dissolve, we find the word solve. And so what I want to say right now, just to create the premise for this video, right at the top, is that the solution is in the dissolution. The solution is in the dissolution. Solve is within dissolve. So another way of saying this is that there is no evolving without dissolving. There is no spiritual growth or spiritual maturation, in other words, without some form of letting go, of inner alchemy, of inner transmutation, of healing, of clearing, of creating quantum space in our DNA for the light of a higher self to anchor in. There is no evolving without dissolving. In the last video, which was called Have Faith in the Destruction, it's necessary. I talk about the two-sided coin. Well, coins are usually two-sided, aren't they? The coin that has two sides, one side being destruction and the other side being creation. So there is no creation without destruction. And there is no beginning without an ending. There is no birth without death. And there is no love without grief. So we have these dances. There is no light without dark. Really, dark and light coexist. They've coexisted since the beginning of time. So we have these paradoxical dances between opposites, which are actually not opposite. They're actually one. Love and grief are one. Dark and light are one. Creation and destruction are one. Creation and destruction, if you turn them into one, it's really transformation. So it seems like polarities, it seems like opposite, but everything is one. So we don't evolve, though. We don't evolve without some sort of letting go. We must die to some degree to be born anew. So in the video, the last video, which I encourage you to watch about destruction, and I may touch upon that video here and there, but in this video, instead of saying destruction, I'm going to say dissolution. And what we're seeing right now, as I said in that video, what we're seeing across the world is a great destruction, what many people are calling the destruction of our democracy. But another way of saying this is that it's a dissolution, and it's a necessary dissolution. There is no butterfly without the dissolution of the caterpillar. We know that. So dissolution is necessary. But I want to bring this more deeply, and I want to make this a more personal understanding. And that is, there is no awakening to your higher self, higher butterfly, right? The butterfly symbolizes the higher self because it's high in the sky. And the caterpillar represents your lower self, your ego. There is no opening to the light of your higher self. There is no evolving into the light of your higher self, to higher thresholds of awareness, without dissolving the shadows of your lower self, the illusion self or the illusional self. There is no opening to the light of truth without dissolving everything that is false, the heresy, the fear, the shame, the patterns of self-blame, those shadow imprints that exist in our DNA, those imprints that exist in our soul, those imprints that we carry from one lifetime to another, the imprints that we inherit from our ancestors, the imprints that we gain through all sorts of difficult experiences, adverse childhood experiences, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse. They could be birth traumas. They come from various forms of shock trauma, which could be the sudden loss of someone, a natural disaster, an accident, a car accident, a bike accident. So all of these things create these shadow imprints in us. They can. It depends how they're held. It depends how they're integrated. But we are on a journey of learning through those shadow imprints, learning through our trauma, learning through our programming, the programming we get through school, through the media, through the church, through our parents' belief systems. We are here on a journey to learn and grow and evolve through those shadows, but ultimately to transcend them. We are learning through various forms, various degrees of suffering, not for the sake of staying in realms of suffering, not so that we continue on in the valley of the shadow of death, but to ultimately transcend it, to integrate the learning, to integrate those experiences into wisdom, and to take that wisdom into higher planes so that we can serve from higher planes and ultimately move into mastery and ascended mastery into archangelic realms where we serve from a much higher degree of consciousness and with a higher degree of responsibility. So, but that journey of evolution does not happen without dissolution. There must be alchemy along the way. There must be transmutation along the way. We accumulate these trauma and program imprints. We learn through them, but it is in dissolving them and integrating the wisdom accumulated through those experiences that we ascend to higher thresholds of consciousness, higher planes of consciousness. So there is no evolving without dissolving. And the solution that we're looking for, the solution in terms of clarity, in terms of health, in terms of abundance, personal empowerment, healthier relationships, those solutions come in the form of, they must come through dissolution. So in other words, we must dissolve the fears, the shame, the self-blame, the limiting beliefs in our DNA. We must clear that out so that we can anchor in the light of truth. We can anchor in the divine qualities of genius, creativity. So we can anchor in compassion and forgiveness and love and wonder and magic in our psychobiology. So we can integrate that consciousness more in us and have it be like a divine motherboard that operates our human awareness. So the dissolution is we are unhooking from these patterns that so many people are addicted to, attached to. When Buddhism talks about attachment, and it's not just Buddhism, it's really many spiritual traditions talk about attachment, we often think of attachment to things outside of ourselves. We're attached to money. We're attached to this person. We're attached to, our technology, our smartphone. But really, attachment has its core, unhealthy attachment has its core in being attached to our trauma, being attached to our programming and identifying with it. This is what's called a trauma bond. We're bonded to that trauma, and that inner trauma bond, what it does is that it creates outer trauma bonds. It creates patterns of codependency, not just with people. It creates codependency, honestly, with larger systems, the entire matrix of this world. That world depends on, in many ways, on our trauma and programming, because our trauma and programming is what hooks us into that matrix. And that matrix needs us to continue to feed it. Right? Let's remember, and I talked about this in the last video, that the school system, the standardized school system, was designed to have us fit into and feed our society, our economy, because in many ways the school system was formed from the Industrial Revolution when they needed workers. They needed workers to fill the factories, and so they created schools that were filled with rote learning, mechanized learning, repetitive learning, to mold people to fit these conveyor belt jobs within industry. And so industry depended on molding children. It depended on inculcating children with very dry, linear learning that had nothing to do with creativity and imagination. And this system today, the matrix still today, the outer matrix, the world, and not all aspects of the world are like, matrix-like, right? There's many wonderful things about the world. But yeah, the matrix still today depends very much on us fitting into it, feeding it. It depends on us, and we, in our trauma identity, in our survival identity, need that world. And it's not just the school system, of course, that conditions us. It's our home environment that conditions us. If we grew up believing that we needed to be smart, for instance, to get mommy and daddy's love, approval, safety, and then we go to the school, which really reinforces the need to be smart, then we may become an academic, a professor in a university, and the university needs us to be smart. And yet how much of that smartness is coming from a survival adaptation? How much of that smart me identity has its roots in fear? Because when that person was a child, if they didn't get A's or B's, they may have gotten in trouble. They may have gotten punished, right? So that person grows up and they feed the system. They feed the university, the college, in many ways from that trauma identity, the I am smart identity. They feed that system, and the system feeds them. It pays them good money. It feeds them. It allows them to keep hiding out in that identity and not having to feel. Is this making sense? So that's a codependent relationship. That's a codependent relationship. Now, if you look across the board, you'll find that different forms of that codependent relationship. You'll find it certainly, and I've written about this, I might have spoken about this in previous videos, you certainly see this in healthcare. You see this in social work. You see this in the police force. You see this in professional sports, right? How many athletes have you heard say in interviews, I got something to prove? Well, why do they have something to prove? Where does that come from? And how much of the management of their team, the owners of their team that they're playing for, depend on them needing to have something to prove, because that need to have something to prove pushes them to perform. What happens when they start to heal themselves and suddenly they don't care as much about needing to prove and needing to perform? Well, suddenly there's a good chance their performance will go down. That was the case for me. When I started doing my healing work and I healed the belief that I'm not good enough, suddenly I didn't care as much if I let a goal in soccer I was a goalie. I was less intense, and goalies need to be intense in many ways, unless they're just playing for fun. But that environment was hard to not be competitive in. So when I healed, I just walked away from my team. I walked away from the game. And if the college professor does enough healing, maybe it'll be hard for him to continue caring so much about academia. Or maybe he or she will do it in a different way. Maybe they will teach and grow in their profession, but from a much more soulful and balanced way, and not driven by fear and shame. They'll do it in a different way. They'll unplug, but they'll still be there. So what I'm trying to say to you is, if you look across the board, if you look into pretty much all the different professions within our society, there is a level of codependency. There's a level of codependency. We have a world that is so much built on fear and shame and blame, on various expressions of trauma and programming. We have a world that's so much built on that. And we keep bringing people into this world and feeding that system. From the time they're born, through their family, through the education system, they're feeding that system, and then they become dependent on that system because they're identified with that system in many ways. And that's really where I'm going with this, is that they're identified with that system. They're hooked into it. So as they dissolve the trauma and programming, as people dissolve the trauma and programming out of their system, as they transmute it, as they clear it, they unhook from the world. They unhook from the world. They unhook from their job. They unhook from this relationship they're in a codependent relationship with. They unhook. And that's the detachment. They detach. And they start living more and more from their soul. And now that they're living more and more from their soul, they're able to be in the world, but they know themselves as not being of the world. And that has been the message of our great avatars, our great spiritual teachers, is to be in the world, but to remember that you're not of this world. You're of the light. You're of Source. You're of God. You're of Buddha, Christ light, however you wish to call it. Right? But the more you're identified with your trauma and programming, that is which is born from the world, the more you identify with that, then you're going to identify yourself as being of the world, not of spirit. And the more you're going to get lost in the world. And then you're going to have a trauma bond with the world, built from the trauma bond you have internally. So when we dissolve that trauma and programming, the more we do, the more we free ourselves from the world. And the more we free ourselves from the world, the more we can be of service to the world. because we're not lost in it anymore. We're living from the light. We're living from the light. And therefore, another way of saying this, everyone, is that the solution is in the dissolution, the soul-ution. Okay, so when we dissolve, we open up to the soul-utions. So in other words, the soul-ution is in the dissolution. Yeah, so this, you get where I'm going. That's another wordplay for you. So when we dissolve and when we open to the light and that light anchors in, we can bring more of our soul and its many, many gifts, its many, many talents, its vision, its wisdom, its abundance, its creativity, its imagination. We can bring all that in as solutions, soul-utions for our very hungry, hungry and crying world. We can bring that in. Because now we're operating from a much higher frequency of consciousness. We're working from a divine motherboard of technology. And we can birth that into the world because we're no longer attached to the world. We're no longer in a trauma bond, inside and out. So yeah, I think I'm glad I made this video. I think it worked out well, and hopefully it's inspired you to some degree. I want to let you all know that this Saturday and Sunday, I'm leading 2 online healing and activation ceremonies. Saturday, Archangel Michael. Sunday, Archangel Raphael. You get a direct transmission from each archangel, and they come to support you with your healing and empowerment. They come to support the dissolution and the soul-utions inside of you. And the ceremony with Archangel Michael on Saturday is 3 p.m. Pacific. On Sunday with Raphael, the online ceremony is noon Pacific. And they are 77 Canadian, 75 minutes long. I'll put a link in the description. And of course, please share this video, like, comment, subscribe, click notifications. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I also have a lot of links in the description around my newsletter. I invite you to subscribe to my free newsletter, and also to my social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. So thank you everyone for being with me, and take good care of yourself.